If you're just joining, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. We'll give it another minute or two to allow for everybody to sign in. And then I'm going to put the agenda in the chat after all the intros. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name is Michelle Moskowitz-Brown, and I'm the Executive Director at Local Matters. I'm also the Chair of the Ohio Food Policy Network. If you joined today's call, you may know that we're intending this to be a pretty informal conversation. So there is not a very formal agenda. I did send some notes just now in the chat. Essentially, this conversation is around streamlining benefits, and you may be doing this work in wherever you are, and this particular conversation came up recently at our Ohio Food Policy Network Summit in November. Essentially, we asked Representative Marcy Kaptur how she thought we could go about some of the work that we've talked about around streamlining benefits, and she said, let me know what your ideas are and we will put something in action. So kind of just taking up that call, I volunteered to host this conversation, but certainly not planning on leading a specific project through. Really wanted to have an opportunity to think about projects that we know that are happening already. Obviously, there's history to this issue, but essentially our agenda is wanted to start with just discussing what the problem is that we're trying to solve regarding food benefit coordination. Wanted to brainstorm some solutions without having any notion of what a good or bad idea might be there, and then potentially ending with a couple of ideas that we think might have some traction. I'm definitely, even as a volunteer here, willing to host a series of meetings, maybe the same, fourth Tuesday of the month next month, to continue this for a couple of months so that we can get one idea moving, and happy to help steward that in any way that I can. Just a little bit about myself. I'm currently Executive Director at Local Matters. My personal history is I grew up on food stamps in housing projects in Canarsie, Brooklyn, so have definitely experienced food insecurity in my own life, but thankfully not in any recent years. And when it comes to solutions, I generally don't like to talk about anything that I'm not going to do. So that's as much as I can commit. Those of you who know me know that if I get an idea, I will see it through. So that's what I can promise you. To the extent that that is possible, whatever we come up with, I will definitely make it my responsibility to help shepherd that idea to its next steps. And I'd also say, even though this kind of cropped out of the Ohio Food Policy Network, I think some of the things we're going to talk about are definitely probably more programmatic, and that's fine. So we don't have to pigeonhole ourselves to, is this a policy issue or is this a program issue? We can just figure out what we think should happen. So if you are just joining, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. And then just a recap of our agenda for today. I want to talk a little bit about what is the problem that we're trying to solve regarding coordination of food benefits, what are possible solutions, and what are maybe our top 3 ideas when we end this meeting. I will preface this by saying that we could start this conversation by saying, if people only had a little more money, if we only had, say, universal basic income or some other big idea, then that would solve the problem. But unfortunately, and many of you work in government and other public programs, you know that that's not happening tomorrow, and also that's not the basis for our conversation today. So we're going to focus our energies on what are the benefits that do exist, how could we help coordinate them, and what are some things that we haven't thought about. So I think ideally just coming up with some existing strategies that we're working on, but also some ideas that we haven't thought of. And I also wanted to say, if you have personal experience with food insecurity and or navigating benefits, I definitely want to make sure that your voice has primacy in this conversation. So whether you're writing in the chat or speaking, feel free to unmute yourself to speak, and then otherwise just keep yourselves muted. And I guess the only other thing I'll share before I open this up is, I'll share one idea, or I'll share a slight framing of the issue that I think we're trying to solve, and then open that up for what you all think the problem is. But just the genesis, some of this came out of those of us who work in sort of nutrition incentives know that there are a variety of currencies that people have to navigate. And so for some time, we've just talked about, whether there was a convenient way to digitize or sort of figure out a central system for navigating that. And I will also say that I know that there's some history to some of this work with the Ohio Benefits Bank. I'm not planning to necessarily cover that, but I will put a link to that project that is not currently active. I'll put that in the chat. That's all the background I've got. I think that the very positive thing is that we have the ear of elected officials, both as the Ohio Food Policy Network and as folks working, in public agencies and not-for-profits and in community-based organizations. That what we have working for us is that people want to see change happen. They want us to find solutions. So with that energy, I open up the conversation to just hear a few people share, what do you think the problem is right now with the way benefits are administered, and what is the problem that you think we should be trying to solve together? So the floor is open for discussion on that topic, whether you can unmute or you can write in the chat.
To stop the silence, Michelle, I'll start, and just, it might reiterate a bit of what you've said, but also coming out of the nutrition incentive space, helping initially folks enrolled in SNAP with matching dollars to be spent at farmers markets. And in the conversation about broadening that program and expanding that program and reaching the customers that we're trying to reach, we're encountering myriad folk interested in either serving target populations or other benefit programs to kind of, embrace that idea. And so trying to line up what was originally a SNAP program with some matching dollars to parallel programs, it was like trying to match an orange and a lobster. Like they're just entirely different entities, even though they're trying to accomplish the same things. And then you add the layer of government bureaucracy to that, government departments. And I'm not saying anything that I don't think people on this webinar already know. It almost sets it up to be an impossible question, right? What are we really trying to unpack and also align? But then in, the way that USD funding has happened for incentive programs and funding in general is what's innovative, what's new, what sexy thing do you have for us this year? And so the conversation has evolved to say, how can technology help this situation? And so there have been pilots and some ideas that I do think we can glom onto, and having the opportunity in the invitation in our annual summit last year from Representative Chapter to say, bring it, bring us your great ideas. I think that instead of framing it like this impossible conversation of trying to figure out how jobs and family services and health and, different federal agencies might align to say, offer one benefit system, we could find a middle place to say what's possible. So, but it doesn't mean it's not complicated.
This is Christine Hawks. I am the market manager for the Worthington Farmers Market. And there's a lot of what you said, Amy, that resonates for me, but on a smaller scale, we have seen an increase in our EBT shoppers over the last 2 years. And what excited me about the discussion from November and the motivation for jumping on for today's call is the idea of potentially having a single currency or a digitized currency. Right now, as someone who accepts EBT payments, it seems it's a bit cumbersome of a process for our shoppers and certainly for our producers and farmers to understand what sorts of currencies they can accept for their products. From a customer standpoint, they have to come to the information booth, they swipe their EBT card, and then we exchange with them tokens for that amount that they've swiped. And then we match in produce perks incentives for the purchase of fresh produce up to $25 on that amount. And that's a separate token. So then the customers and the producers are left with determining which token do I use for which eligible products. And then the process of obtaining those produce perks seems a bit invasive. And I know that those are grant funded, and part of the grant process is that they want data back, right? That's or we can't get something for nothing. So sometimes that just seems a bit invasive in having to ask customers, the EBT customers, rather than getting to just swipe their card and shop like a credit card processor. It's stopping and asking them a series of questions from what's your zip code? How do you find our pricing here? Having to enter some of their card data. Again, and it's something that we certainly understand why we are doing that, but sometimes that doesn't always translate to the customer. And the invasive part, I say, is because a lot of times we'll have people queuing up behind them that are also hearing this exchange of information. So sometimes it seems a bit like we're singling that person out when someone coming up for a simple credit card transaction doesn't have to do all of that work, if you will. So having some sort of simplified process definitely appeals to me, and I think it will help incentivize and serve our customers better from a farmers market perspective.
Great, thanks, Christine. Thanks for walking through that process for those who aren't familiar with how that currently is administered at the farmers market. I see Cheryl's got her hands up. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Yeah, Michelle, I think the other thing that I think is really key to this, and I have less experience, and just speaking from past experience, my new role on the funding side is not this experience, it's my experience at Columbus Public Health prior to this, and having worked with both Produce Perks, WIC, not as experienced with the senior farmers market, but I feel like that sometimes that people in need leave dollars on the table because they don't know actually how to use them. And I think that at the end of the day, our real goal must be on maximizing the existing programs for the individuals who are using them, and making sure that, once those dollars are issued, sometimes particularly with some of the projects like WIC and SNAP or Senior Farmers Market, they don't go to somebody else if they don't get used. So I think it's really important to think about the end user. The main thing is making sure that they get every dollar and are able to use every dollar to put food in their homes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the goal being, if you had one system to some extent that combined a few, then ideally it would be easier to keep track of for the customer. So we're talking in what I expect us to talk about, which is really around, potentially streamlining nutrition incentives and a variety of different programs. Is there anything, and I think there's, threads here around communications and marketing and all those sorts of things, but is there any idea that's come to anyone's mind around streamlining benefits that isn't necessarily digitizing, or, and when I say digitizing, that means just, using technology to streamline how people use benefits, but any ideas that are not related specifically to this topic? And if there aren't, that's fine. We can zero in on this. Just wanted to leave room.
I can jump in. This is Carmen Clutter with the Ohio Department of Aging. We oversee the Senior Farmers Market Nutrition Program. And immediately something that comes to my mind with the benefits we distribute. So we use coupon paper-based coupons, and there's a decent amount of requirements from our federal funders and regulation of what needs to be included on those coupons. So when I think through the process of perhaps streamlining, consolidating benefits, I think one of the biggest thing is looking at current requirements of benefit programs that are perhaps regulated federally or either have other operation guidelines that they need to adhere to. So looking at, for Senior Farmers Market, maybe our regulations are very similar to WIC Farmers Market coupons, and we could all have the same information on those. But I think understanding what regulatory language needs to be in place or pulled in to consideration for the different programs would be key. I also sit here thinking to myself, like, gee, I hope I have a good sense of all the incentive programs, and maybe I don't. Maybe I'm not fully aware of all the programs and all the mechanisms and all the different kind of benefits, but maybe that's the first line of really making sure that we know all of the food incentive, produce incentive programs that are out there, regulations tied to them. And we could even have the different agencies, add information of requirements for their benefit programs. We have, very specific requirements for our Senior Farmers Market coupons that current regulation says we have to keep in there, but it could be a conversation to advocate for regulatory change if there's a better opportunity to cut some of those regulations out, if we think it'd be an opportunity to streamline benefits that would impact and benefit the consumer, but also our vendors, our farmers, market managers too.
Thanks, Carmen. You know what I really like is the framing around regulatory changes being a regulatory reduction, which I think a lot of people can get on board when we talk about reducing regulation. But your point of just making a list of the incentives and the requirements that we can kind of collectively contribute to would be, I think, something that's super doable, right? That we could do now, and that could then provide the support if we did want to seek some sort of change. So that seems like a really kind of actionable step that could come out of this. And
yeah,
I think
that would be good. Sorry, Jill. Maybe even adding to that target audience. So I know that's kind of common sense, but it might just be another good thing that we can add. Obviously, for the senior program, our benefits are solely for older adults, 60 plus income guidelines. WIC is different than that, but that could just be, a good kind of foundation setting of understanding where we're starting from and the target audience of who's going to be spending those coupons or the benefits or whatever.
And I know Amy put a note in the chat that about the Ohio Farmers Market Network starting something like this.
If they're all to be, not all of the incentives are to be spent at farmers markets, but that, obviously grocers as well might have some sort of cheat sheet, but certainly that's a place where all those currencies, including produce prescriptions rather, are sent to be redeemed upon a group of folks who are, often volunteers and super part-time.
Besides a list of these requirements, do we have a list of how people are being reached out to? So if we know what the requirements are and how is the message getting out? Why do we hear so often, well, people say, well, I didn't know about that. I didn't know about that. So how is the message getting out, and what do we do about expanding that and working on that end of it so that once we know what the requirements are, and we know there may be changes, but for the short term, how do we get word out to those in a more effective way?
If I recall correctly, when the state had our Food Policy Advisory Council, oh gosh, some of you may know this better than I, there was kind of a pilot of kind of cross communication between, like, I think, was it WIC and STEP? I can't remember, but there was cross communication about benefits that was done. This would have been, 12 years ago. And if I recall, Noreen, and I could go try and find my notes, there was success in that communication, in that they increased people's usage of benefits that they could already access anyway, but that they just now knew how to do that.
I vaguely remember that, but I also wonder if we need to revisit it and see, where that's at and how can we build upon it?
If you've joined recently, Jill's got the notes going in the chat. And right now we're talking about what are the problems that we're trying to solve regarding food benefits. And we've mainly been focusing on nutrition incentives and the variety of forms that it takes. And Noreen was just talking about how do we work on that outreach. So I think an outcome of this group could either be, we probably aren't going to necessarily be end all be all for everything. I think certain organizations may have a bigger role to play in marketing. This task force might be, should we decide to have a task force of sorts, could be on, the streamlining of the specific program that's going to streamline benefits. But clearly, marketing communications in any of this is essential. I mean, even with Local Matters operating a veggie ban, just letting people know that the veggie ban exists is its own form of, it needs its own marketing and outreach plan. So I think we all have to be doing our work sort of at the organizational level, and then obviously at the community level, it's about what festivals and street fairs are you at so that people can actually find out about the work that we're all doing. So another idea that, just to reiterate what Jill and Carmen had originally shared, is getting that list together again. So starting with what does the Ohio Farmers Market Network have in terms of a current list of benefits, and then keeping that updated. And it's probably going to take all of us sharing that in our networks at a minimum, even starting there to increase utilization. But as Cheryl pointed out, a key component of all of this is, digitizing so that we can, streamlining benefits so that we can increase people's ability to utilize the benefits that exist in our community, and to increase people's knowledge of said benefits. So those all seem like goals, outcomes, opportunities so far.
I think
any other solutions? Yeah.
Michelle, just real quickly, just to add to that, is that, educating people on what the systems are right now continues to put the onus on the person living in poverty to figure out how to use them and maximize them. And I think the real goal of this group is to put the onus back on those that have the power over the systems and the programs, to try and make it easier on the individuals who need them. So I just I agree wholeheartedly that, continuing to support and encourage people in the system as it lives today. But I wouldn't want to lose sight of the fact that education about what is today is a stopgap as we try to solve the bigger problem, which is these systems are very siloed.
Yeah, I agree with Cheryl there, that there has to be some kind of balance between giving power and agency to the individual, but also we as the network, we as advocates being knowledgeable. And I don't know if this is what you're referring to, Jill. I know it came up in another call, but the Ohio Benefits Bank that was established under the Strickland administration, that might have been a decade ago. But they had trained community advocates, but essentially anybody could go in their system, type in their income, demographic data, and then it would, based on your zip code, would tell you where you can go to find out more information or who accepted which benefits, so a combination of making that information completely accessible to the user, but also making sure that organizations are updating their contact info, putting current information on the internet, because we're putting a lot of onus on caseworkers or social workers, to completely help navigate people through the system, but folks fall through the cracks all the time. There's definitely language and literacy issues as well. I think about all influx of, refugee populations coming into Central Ohio, and, often they're not getting the full foray of benefits that they might be eligible for.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to say that my impulse in organizing today, is to reiterate, is potentially start a pilot project. I think that if this group of people wants to broaden, outreach and whatever comes of that, just recognizing that there's a lot that would go into that, and we'd have to figure out how we want to organize ourselves to accomplish that. I think we all have a lot of agreement around what's not working. And so as we move through this, I think, we'll see how much each of us wants to, where we want to put our energy, but knowing that in terms of agency, it's really going to be about, what are we going to do? What are we each going to do to solve the problem?
Sorry.
Oh, Diane, I was just going to say, just to close, I put the Ohio benefits link in there, and we can connect again, with the Columbus Foundation and others here who know, how and when and why that winded down specifically, but yeah, and that also obviously was more than food related benefits. Go ahead, Diane. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. I'm Diane Gogan-Turner. I'm with the Ohio Department of Health. I'm the chief of the Bureau of Maternal, Child, and Family Health, which includes a variety of programs, but specific to this conversation, WIC Farmers Market, and produce prescription demonstration program. I just wanted to clarify. I think whoever suggested maybe cataloging the inventory of the different programs that we're talking about, and then see where there are potential for streamlining or alignment. I wasn't sure if the suggestion was to ask the markets to generate that or ask the programs, or is it to ask the markets first and then maybe identify who's responsible for the program, and then they can fill in the blanks. But I thought that was a great suggestion for a starting point, and I'm sure programs would be happy to fill in whatever blanks.
Yeah, I think between the folks who are on the call, between the Ohio Farmers Market Network and Produce Perks, we can probably get something, within our heads and what we have on paper. I think that'll be pretty easy to come by. But maybe some of those other steps are where you utilize these programs and all of that stuff that comes with it. That's not just what are they, but then how do you actually find everything without going down a confusing rabbit hole, right? So yeah, making it usable for folks to, that, as others have pointed out, that the onus shouldn't be on a person who is receiving the benefits to just have to figure out a lot of complicated programs that often have a lot of different paperwork.
And then I would also share a general government benefit. So Ohio Benefits is a place where Ohioans can apply for Medicaid, SNAP, and TANF, but it's expanding to include childcare. We have been collaborating with Medicaid and Job and Family Services to add the question of, are you interested in WIC, and also at some point home visiting. So we're trying to, at least where people can start or begin access to programs through one system with Ohio Benefits. And collaboration overall, the Department of Health does collaborate with Medicaid and Job and Family Services to cross-promote our programs, but open to any ideas of how we could do better, of course.
I want to just add, I think earlier, and if this was the question, Diane, you're asking earlier when Carmen and I were talking, I think there's also just the work of understanding all the nutrition incentives, the requirements, who they target, the size of the program, their funders, and any requirements for communicating along the lines of, like Carmen was describing, the paper, currency that has to include specific information. If we could document kind of the burden it puts on the user because of all of the different requirements, then what we can make is a case to maybe remove some of the regulation that requires it to be done in 8 different ways instead of 1 different way. So it's more of a, I would say that would be more at the programmatic end, because, or maybe, some of the program users, but some of those kind of background, like, why is it that the funder requires this? Sometimes the user doesn't the person who's running that program wouldn't understand that, but meaning at the farmer's market, but the person kind of behind it, like in the administration, would better know that. So I would add that. Carmen, is that kind of what we were talking about earlier, this compiling of a database? Okay.
Yeah. And I think Ohio Farmers Market Network does have something very similar to that. But I don't believe it's in a format that's appropriate for like sharing with consumers or participants, or even, CBOs, community-based organizations. But not to say we couldn't be there or get there, but I don't know if it's there yet, or what their, beyond sharing with market managers, what their intent to widely distribute that resource would be.
Go ahead, Amy.
I just was going to add on to what Jill said about that matrix, not just showing, and again, as a way to maybe take the burden off the user, incorporate the requirements also of the grocers and the farmers market managers, because I think, I'm jumping ahead to making the case rather than identifying all the problems, but if you can make an economic case for the businesses involved, it really isn't, it just gets away from that stigmatizing the poor, and really you can elevate it perhaps into, or add a different audience to the conversation of those burdened by unnecessary regulations.
Yeah, it's a great point on communications and kind of changing the narrative around how we talk about food and food access. So anything that we take that exists currently, I think this group could come up with some solutions for communicating more clearly and for different audiences and who needs to know what. I think that wouldn't be such a big job after all for us to accomplish together. So I know there were some notes in the chat around what is Produce Perks doing in terms of digitizing. I've definitely spoken with Tevis about this. If they're not on the call today, I won't speak too much about it. But this is something that we've talked about for a number of years. I think a pilot in our community could be reasonably feasible. I mean, even from a technology point of view, I think that there's a way to make a card for at least, start with adding, Produce Perks, utilization on a separate card. It probably couldn't be on the SNAP card because, as we know, as was talked about by the Worthington market, you can't regulate what someone uses on a SNAP card. So if you only want to use, if you only want to be able to use the Produce Perks benefits for fruits and vegetables, you have to have some way to make that active through a specific card. So I have some ideas about QR codes and ways that we can sign vendors up to do this, but that's just me playing around with the idea in the background. But basically, I think a technology grant, let's say it's $100,000. I don't know exactly, but that's kind of the number that Tevis and I have thrown around in the past. We'd have to really get into how many, where could that pilot take place? Who needs to be engaged to do it? I know I saw the note go out that Produce Perks Midwest is looking for support. An RFP went out around technology at farmers markets. So clearly we would be coordinating with them probably as a starting place to try something like this. Starting with one card that has your Produce Perks benefits is like kind of the tipping off point that, some of us have wanted to see, just that you're not carrying tokens around and then not redeeming them, et cetera. So as we move into solutions, that's one that I think is essentially on the table, if that makes sense, as like a starting place for at least having a card that's probably different than your SNAP card, but at least has all of your benefits, starting with maybe Produce Perks, whether you're doing a straight, Produce Perks or maybe even Produce Prescription. I'm trying to think. I'm forgetting one all of a sudden on the Produce Perks side. Prescriptions, regular produce perks, and there's another. Does anyone catch me on this? What am I forgetting?
TANF programming?
I was thinking TANF, but I thought there was, maybe it's just TANF, yeah. So then, of course, yeah, that's coming down the pike is, got the PRX, got the regular produce perks, and then I guess TANF is the other one I'm probably thinking of, which is a pretty big benefit. I mean, $240 all in one fell swoop. Getting that in tokens is going to be terrible, you know, basically. So it is what it is for right now, but if we can get that moving, you know, by next season, that would be amazing in terms of getting one card. What other solutions? Do people want us to pursue that and figure out how to get that going, that card going? What else do we want to do? Karima, thinking about online redemption system. I think that, yeah, using apps to redeem. This is another major pressing issue. Karima, thank you for jogging my memory, my mind, which is that many of you know that SNAP can only be, most of the major grocers can do SNAP through delivery, but smaller grocers, there's some pilots in this area, but it's very difficult. So like if our local Mayor's Veggie Van wants to provide SNAP through delivery, we have to go to someone's door and have them swipe their SNAP card at the door because we can't take their SNAP information online. And you know, in some of the markets, larger grocers have been able to get that done, but it's going to be a long time before we're able to do that in our communities. So that's an impediment. One way to get around that is to at least put the order in online, and then you come in person for a pickup and you swipe your card. So if the farmers markets get their apps going online and people want to shop that way, which I think they do, then it's not the worst thing in the world, but you would have to pick up at this point. And also we need those systems in place before we can do that. Go ahead, Noreen.
I would just want to suggest and also make sure that any solution that we come up with before anything goes further, that there's people in the community who actually utilize these benefits, that we run them by them so that, you know, we can make sure that there's any things that don't work, that we're getting a full picture of whatever we're promoting.
Yeah, so I know we can do that at Local Matters through our current community advisory group. Noreen, do you have suggestions for how folks can reach out specifically to get feedback and what format that might take?
Well, I mean, in our situation, we have a group of about 16 community members who are community advocates. Sharon Jones is here with us today. She's part of our group from across the Columbus area, and we meet once a month. So I think getting some information together, there's one group that's, you know, from at least the central, from Columbus, you know, in the Cleveland area, there's a group that could be, things could be taken to them. So, you know, I think it's a matter of just figuring out who to talk with and get there in person to discuss what's being proposed and get input from people. Sharon, what do you think?
Noreen, I definitely agree with that. Having been a person who has been a recipient of SNAP benefits, as well as, I mean, when I go to, I love the farmer's market. Let me just start by saying that. And it didn't matter if I was, you know, I had regular income or I had supplemental income, i.e. SNAP benefits. When I went to the market, I wanted to be able to go in, get what I wanted to purchase, and get out. And the having to stand in line, get tokens. Now, not only do I have heavy groceries, but I got all of this bag of stuff in my hand that is cumbersome, you know, and having to pull it out. I remember the days growing up when the food stamps were the little paper stamps, the little booklets and whatever, and how the shame that comes with that. Me personally, I don't have that, but I know people who do, and I can see their faces when they would pull those things out. Streamlining is like the best thing to say that I'm a human being, I'm a citizen, I'm worthy to be here. In terms of how do we go about it, I've heard great ideas. I want to throw in something for you to think about. Noreen talked about making sure to go out to the people. Please think about your senior citizens when you talking about apps and QR codes and all of these things, because that's frustrating for them. I have a neighbor, perfect example. Anything that has to do with technology, he's knocking at my door. and he's only like 70, 71. And a lot of people in their 70s are, quite techie and whatever. But there's a group of people. And when you get out of Columbus and go into other parts of Ohio, you got a lot of people who are struggling in that area. You have some younger people who might be struggling in that area simply because they may not have the access to those things. So think about those things. But I can speak as a resident of Columbus in terms of where can you go to give that information. Your schools, that's your number one right there. We have the largest school system. Columbus City Schools, get it into the parents' hands. There's places that I'm speaking as a former PTA mom, that there are places that you can put flyers, handouts, however you go about doing it. Columbus City has a flyer called Peachtree. It's an online program, and they send out all their documents, whether it's from them or from the state or somewhere, whatever. It's a newsletter, and it's sent out whenever there's a new thing. It's sent out. So think about your school systems, think about your libraries, and places where people will shop.
Thanks, Sharon. Carmen with your hand up.
Yeah, so I'll kind of piggyback a little bit on what Sharon just kind of spoke of, but with the Senior Farmers Market Program and the WIC Farmers Market Program receiving funding from USDA, we're seeing like national trends trying to pilot some of these more digital solutions, technology-based solutions. We are not, but we're very much invested in what other people are doing and the outcomes and the successes and challenges that they kind of go through. So we are trying to keep our ears on the ground with other states that are trying to implement those solutions, honestly, for some lessons learned. With the senior program specifically, not that we are resistant to change or not want to be a part of the great solution, but we have very high redemption rates of our paper-based coupons. Pre-pandemic, we were about at 98% redemption across the state. So we love that our older adults love the programs and utilize the coupons they are getting. We only have anecdotal information that they're not interested in technology-based, app-based, phone-based spending, but that obviously that's not like data rich, it's just from things that we've heard from local communities. But we could probably try at some point, maybe even soon, to try to survey our participants. Again, we don't have email address of our participants, and it would be quite the campaign to reach 42,000 older adults in the state that take advantage of the Senior Farmers Market Program. But we could try to start understanding their interest in streamlining food benefits, other programs they participate in, interest in any kind of technology or digital card-based solution, to see if that's something that would be interesting to them. We also want to keep in mind the farmers that we contract with. So we do know that we have some farmers that have voiced concern that if we would move to a digital platform or technology-based platform, they would no longer participate in the program. Again, I think that's not a blanket statement. I think there's definitely farmers and market managers that would absolutely love a move to streamlined or digital technology, based solutions. So it's kind of difficult to like weigh what option would be best. I think there's so many confounding factors. Right now we have a PhD student actually evaluating our senior program across the state. So it's talking with our local agencies that operate it, our farmers that are contracted for it, and then also our participants. So hopefully we'll get some information out of those focus groups to see if any of the information gathered from there does speak to any kind of streamline or modernization of the program at all. And we'd be happy to share some findings and recommendations from that work too.
That's great, both Sharon and Carmen. Also, the notion that this isn't one size fits all, and actually, if redemption is great for seniors, maybe that's not a place where we need to focus energy. So back to that notion of let's make sure that more people can access more food in more situations, and that they're knowledgeable about it as like an overarching goal. Then there's definitely a room for something where you have a card where you can use your produce perks program. It's not the end all be all for every person who goes to a market or a participating store, but it would be one step that's probably going to increase people's ability to utilize and their benefits, and also have dignity around not having to wait in line for additional tokens, and hopefully maybe working on some of the regulatory constraints so that we can avoid having to answer lots of questions in person, on a line, etc. So far, I think we have a few different program ideas or project ideas. I was talking about ending this meeting with 3 ideas. I heard the need for research of what other people are doing in other communities. So what are those pilot programs? Potentially additional research related to surveys. We talked about creating a usable list of resources. Maybe it's sort of a base document that you can take pieces of for different populations, depending on what you're trying to share, but kind of a master's list of all the benefits available, who they apply to, how to utilize them, and again, using them for different reasons, depending on who you're reaching, so that if you're working with seniors, you're not sending them information about PRX that they can't access, that type of thing. And then there's this actual pilot program of, do we want to work on digitizing benefits for some population, some portion of this population of folks who, pending knowledge that that is what people want, by working with certain groups to check and see, would this be useful to you, potentially embarking on a pilot program to create some kind of card that is a little bit more of a streamlined way to access benefits like produce perks, dollar for dollar match. So those are 3 things that I think we would need different people to work on different components of this. Again, this is a pretty informal group that's not necessarily working on within any organization, which is the beauty and sort of the curse of our community work, right? When we get together without a formal structure, but would love, by the time we finish this meeting, for folks who want to help with any of those 3 areas to kind of take some responsibility for that. And before we go to closing in that way, of course, we've got plenty of time. I can't follow the chat that well, so go ahead and pipe in what you wanted to share. I think Noreen had her hand up.
I just want to go back to what Cheryl said a while ago. And in terms of, a lot of these programs come out of federal legislation or federal rules. And so there's, universal basic income, there's taking the, food out of the farm bill, bigger picture things like that. And I'm just wondering if there's any of that we want to, at some point, spend some time on, like trying to figure out, is there any interest in learning more about those things and looking to see is there one of those that we could get behind and help educate people about and meet with legislators. Anyway, just that bigger picture of dealing with some of this stuff in a bigger systemic way.
Yeah, just a quick response, Nora, that I think the OFPN summit. So again, I kind of organize this as like a very practical based, let's get some solutions going, understanding that since we don't yet have UBI, but we do have a farm bill coming up, that we definitely need to have big picture conversations. And this is super informal and like, let's get a couple of solutions going. But the Ohio Food Policy Network summit, I think, would be the place to convene kind of the bigger picture conversations in a format that already definitely exists for that. Amy?
In the chat, there's a flurry of, pilots should include this and this, and we should make sure that we're doing this and this. And just a reminder, that I think a pilot would be something small and focused, and really kind of posit a specific question, like, is it increasing redemption rate, or is it expanding to an audience of a certain age or a certain demographic? Because then the expansion can happen after that with some of those findings. But in the, just to contradict myself, in the notion of I know where Produce Perks has been successful generally is this has not just been a Department of Health conversation. This is a conversation and I'm not singling out Department of Health folks on the call. Just this hasn't been one issue. It's talking about food access and helping Ohio farmers right at the same time. And in all of our case statements, we're showing the dollars being spent with Ohio growers. So whether it's dollars being spent with Ohio businesses and at the same time improving food access, or some sort of duplicate message, I think we'll serve ourselves.
Robin Henderson here. I just have maybe a clarifying question, or maybe it's just a question in general. It seems like there's been different buckets. We've talked about streamlining. So we've talked about the buckets of the user, how we streamline that. People have talked about streamlining the experience at the markets from the administrative side and the farmer side. And so I don't know if a pilot is something that would try and look across all of those, or if we would want to, in the spirit of what Amy just spoke to about keeping it simple, if there would be a aspect of streaming that would want to be looked at. And I think if it's the user piece, to Sharon's point and Noreen's point, I think the people you ask, how do you need this streamlined, are the people who are the users. And we have good ideas about that, but it may be something, I don't even know. It might be something simple that we don't know. So that's all. Thank you so much.
Great point, Robin. I think that this meeting was, in my mind, from my vantage point, organized around the customer and consumer, but it really important, and people can decide they want to work on something different. But obviously, whenever you're working on a project, there's at least several key stakeholders. So we certainly want to be thinking about how does this affect, to Carmen's point, like farmers who say like I'm just not gonna participate. So what are the trade-offs? What are the drawbacks on choosing one constituent over another? If you don't necessarily have to choose, but you do potentially have to have trade-offs if you prioritize, let's say, the lower income customer. But at the same time, we all acknowledge that the farmer is also a low income consumer. So 100% want to acknowledge that, and just want to say that I think we'd have to work on, to Amy's point, a lot of different projects to meet people's needs all in the same way. So again, this was organized around the low income customer who is purchasing food, and that's where we were headed. But of course, we can and will be working on all of the stakeholders, and we can map some of that out more formally. So Jill, and we are moving into the close to 4 o'clock hour. So after Jill's comment, I'm going to try to close us a bit. So bear with me. Go ahead, Jill.
Yeah, so building off of that, I'm just going back again to that kind of earlier conversation between me and Carmen, which is maybe sometimes to streamline it for the user, you have to go upstream to see, what the barriers might be programmatically, because of differing requirements. So it may end up that while the user's the primary focus, you end up streamlining at the programmatic level and at the farmer level. So there could be, multiple benefits, but I appreciate your focus there. And by the way, I just wanted to follow up that it was state level agencies collaborating on marketing around WIC redemption at farmers markets that happened about 12-ish years ago. That was done by the Food Council. And if I recall, the redemption rates really jumped up, but I could get more information on that. And then I did have a little bit of more info on the benefits bank and kind of where that went, but that's a whole nother conversation. So I'll pass it back to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Jill, and thanks for taking notes. So there's some historical information that I think would be helpful for us all to have on this, as Jill was pointing out. And then there's the, as a sort of streamlined task force, do you all want to get started on doing some of this work? Again, I think there's the research on what exists, there's the listing of the actual resources, and then there's the shopping around a pilot program, which I would say we've identified as talking to people who are most affected by the issue around what kind of streamlining they'd like to see, getting some feedback. At least we know we can do some of that here in Columbus. I would reach out to our friends in Cleveland and could prepare some questions that folks can ask in their communities around what would be helpful, kind of take in what we get there, and potentially work to get some funding to do whatever that appropriate action is. So hope that's clear enough with me speaking pretty quickly on this. Does anybody want to volunteer to either do some research on existing programs, put together this list of existing resources, and or help with the background on collecting information on what a good pilot might be? Feel free to volunteer for 1, 2, or 3. I'm happy to take the lead on number 3, which is investigating a pilot by, again, gathering information from folks most affected. And anyone want to take 1 or 2? And while you're thinking about that, I will say that I will plan another meeting for the last Tuesday of next month. If you're not on the OFPN listserv, please sign up for it. Otherwise, you have friends on this call who will make sure that you know about this meeting. I apologize for not having a necessarily better way to keep track of that, but look out for notes in the OFPN listserv or reach out to one of us if you cannot figure out, how to sign up for that. But there's a link in the chat, and I'm going to put my email in the chat as well for any general or specific questions. And then Carmen, go ahead.
I was going to say I could take lead on the document about the different incentive programs. I can connect with Jamie at the Farmers Market Network to get the document she started, and then either circulate it, update it as far as my knowledge goes, and then maybe circulate it out to see if others need to update on their specific areas. I'd be happy to do that.
That's great. And Carmen, you can go ahead and I'd say post that when you have it to the OFPN listserv and just give like a tiny bit of context. I think that using that as sort of a working group as a whole is just fine. And that way you can hit all the major groups in one fell swoop. So thanks for that. Anybody else want to work on just other, finding out about pilot programs that already exist or research from other cities, any other fun stuff like that? And we will regroup on these 3 items in a month from now and hopefully be ready to report a couple of things. Preliminary.
I can look at some other city policies and, what some pilot programs might be. Are we looking for funding opportunities or just looking at things other, comparative cities have done?
Yeah, so for right now, I think just finding out getting documentation of those programs would be great. And then like I was saying at the beginning, and actually, so thank you, Karima, that's amazing. So we have all 3 of those first tasks. We also did talk about big picture work. I think, again, housing that within OFPN and, convening other conversations around the Farm Bill and, major policy and systems changes has to happen alongside of this. But thank you for moving these 3 important tasks forward. And to the funding issue, I would just say again that my sense is that there are elected officials who would welcome the opportunity to support this work. So we're going to go on good faith that we can pursue that when we have an idea that we want to see happen. There are a lot of people who would want to support this, and hopefully some of them are on this call too and can help us access that. But I think when there's a will from this group, there'll be a way. So with that, I thank you all for coming to this meeting. Feel free to unmute and say goodbye, and look out for an invite through the OFPN listserv for a follow-up meeting.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.